Thank you all for coming back after the break. I love seeing all of you here. This is our first time to do an Ask Everything session where one of our presenters is going to be virtual and one of them is going to be in the room. So we may have a little trial and error here, but I'm hoping that we can make this work. I think something that would be really good for the Q&A part of this, which is the whole thing actually, is to please introduce yourself, say your name and maybe where you're from. I think that'll be particularly helpful to the people who are watching virtually. You also might consider, if you have a virtual question specifically for Damian, to turn around and face the camera so he can see your face. So Clovis is going to be manning that at the back. We're kind of in a new arena here, but let's give it a try, see what we think, see how we like it, and definitely, put that in your comments on the survey at the end here. All right, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our two speakers for today. So first off, I'm going to introduce Morris Levy. Morris joined OCLC in May of 2023. He is OCLC's liaison to the Standing Committee on Standards, or the SCS, of the Program for Cooperative Cataloging, PCC, the Music OCLC Users Group, MOUG, and the Cataloging and Metadata Committee, CMC, of the Music Library Association, MLA. That's a lot of acronyms. Prior to OCLC, Morris was the head of the bibliographic initiatives at The Ohio State University and had previously worked in the retrospective libraries of the Berklee College of Music, Harvard University, and Northwestern University. He has written articles, catalogs, and encyclopedia entries on musical subjects ranging from opera to country, and taught the basic and advanced score cataloging workshops at the 2020 Online Audiovisual Catalogers, or OLAC, conference. Morris has a Bachelor of Arts degree in Music, History and /Theory from Oberlin College, a Master of Arts degree in Folklore from Indiana University, and a Master of Library and Information Science degree from the University of Illinois. Our next co-presenter is Damian Iseminger. Damian is the head of the Music Bibliographic Access Section, MBAS, of the Music Division of the Library of Congress, a position he has held since January 2017. MBAS is responsible for the cataloging of all general collections materials that are in the custody of the Music Division. These materials include sheet music, librettos, literature about music, photographs, and primary source materials related to music creators. Damian received his Bachelor of Musical Arts from DePauw University in 2000 and his Master's in Library Science with Music Specialization from Indiana University in 2004. Before coming to the Library of Congress, Damian was the head of technical services at the New England Conservatory of Music in Boston from 2007 to 2016. So please welcome Damian and Morris.
I don't know what we're supposed to do, Damian.
We're supposed to answer questions, I believe.
Well,
do people have questions?
Could someone ask us a question?
But we do have some questions that came in online, and I do have some responses prepared, so we could start off with those to get the juices flowing for people.
Sounds great.
All right. So we had a question come in. We'll make these anonymous. And it said, and the first question is, why is it that 700 fields with relationship labels such as expression manifested get a second indicator value of 2, but 700 fields with relationship labels such as adaption of or based on have nothing in the second indicator position? Well, the answer to that question lies within the MARC documentation. So the definition for the second indicator is that it is for the type of added entry. And there's only one type that they give. And the one type is that you use value 2, that your item in hand actually contains the work that is represented by the added entry. If it's blank, it means it's an added entry of any kind. But the 2 specifically means that this particular work is included in the item that you are cataloging. So that's why you'll see things that have second indicator value 2 and things that don't.
That makes sense?
Yes.
Yes. So if you are cataloging something and you'd like to include some sort of relationship indicator, let's say that your libretto was based on a story. Well, if the resource is containing the libretto, then you would want to have a second indicator too. If it is an added entry that is referential to what is being contained, then you would not use the second indicator.
Right. And we encounter this a lot in music, is especially so it's, you know, an opera is based on a particular pre-existing work. You know, Verdi's Otello is a good example. It's previously based on Shakespeare's play. Yeah. Second question that came from the same person that we'll answer, and this has to do the difference between I'm assuming it's a subdivision, but we can define it. It's what's the difference between piano scores and 2 piano scores? What's the difference between the two, and how do you know when to apply each term? So to explain a piano score, and I sometimes I want to make sure that catalogers don't have a different meaning than the commonly accepted meaning. So I went to the Oxford Dictionary of Music to confirm this. And we both have the same understanding. So a piano score, it's a reduction of an instrumental or vocal work to a version for piano. And so it's either meant as more like a conducting part where all the music is there and maybe there's cues for different instruments, but it's reduced to piano. And similarly, a 2 piano score is a reduction of a work for larger forces to a version for 2 pianos. And just as an aside, you know, a lot of composers, when they are doing in the initial stages of composition, a lot of the times they're doing 2 piano scores, and then they'll complete what they're doing in a 2 piano version, and then they'll do their orchestration from there. Brahms famously was a 2 piano composer. We have a lot of his manuscripts here at the Library of Congress, and you can see he does all the work there, and then he does the orchestration a little bit later on. So there we go.
So when would you use the subdivision piano scores as opposed to piano music arranged?
Very interesting. Yeah. Well, there are certain classes that are we have famous groups of what we would call piano scores. Liszt is a very famous example of taking an opera and reducing it to a version for piano. And if we think in the context, and the reason why we would say, well, why isn't it piano music arranged? Because it makes more sense within the LCSH structure to say operas and then your form subdivision of piano score. That is more informative than just saying a piano music arranged. So as a sort of an aside here, those Liszt arrangements of various operas or scenes from operas and stuff, you know, for a lot of people in Europe in the 19th century, that was their only contact with the opera that was composed, because they didn't have the money to go to it, or they didn't live in a large metropolitan area. So a lot of people heard, let's say, the Liebestod for the first time through Franz Liszt arrangement. In fact, we know it's Liszt who coined the term Liebestod for the end of Tristan and Isolde. So, a little fun fact for you all.
A little musicology thrown in with our music cataloging. Are you willing to take a comment from Mark at this point?
Sure.
Okay, Damian, can you see me?
I can hear you, and there you are. Very
Okay,
nice.
there I am.
Looking good, Mark.
I was going to. Oh, now we can't see you. Forget that. Okay, well, I was going to ask whether it's also true that the difference between using piano music and arranged and piano scores as a subdivision is that in order to use it as a subdivision, there has to be a form or a type that it's subdividing, as opposed, and so if the music is not in a form or type, that would be the occasion to say piano music arranged. Am I on the right track there?
Yes, I believe you are, Mark.
Okay.
All right. We have another question that came in, and this regards. I'll just say the question. It says, regarding inclusive and/or reparative cataloging efforts, are there any institutional, so she's talking about OCLC or Library of Congress, policy changes or different views to the old policy of, quote, let sleeping dogs lie, unquote, and bibliographic file maintenance, and weighing that with harmful description practices in name authorities and subject authorities? So I'll speak from the LC point of view. I can only speak from anecdotal examples. And I know that during the pre-vaccine days of the pandemic, several efforts were undertaken by the Policy Training and Cooperative Programs Office to address bias and hurtful language in LC classification and LCSH. I cannot confirm if any BFM was done for the changes for Library of Congress classification, simply because we have material stored all over the greater Washington metropolitan area, and changing shelf labels or classifications on the books would be cost prohibitive, but it might be something that was put into the record as an alternative class number. But I am pretty sure that a lot of BFM was done within LCSH for terms that were deemed to be not inclusive or deemed to be hurtful. But once again, I should stress this is just anecdotal on my part. I don't know of any specific policy concerning things like this. So I'll send it over to Morris if OCLC is doing anything with regards to this.
Well, it's certainly something that we are looking at. You know, we have been involved. I know there's been, has been said already about the situation with the 375 and authority records. And OCLC has been ready to hit the button. We have all the programming ready to remove it. We've done all of the cleanup needed for all of the uses of the 375 that did not include a gender term, because often because it was miscoded and was actually for something else. So having worked through all of that, we are ready to hit the button. The thing that's holding us up, at least as far as I know, or last discussed a week or two ago, is the situation at the British Library. Given that so much of their operations are down now due to the data breach, thank you, that they don't want this to happen while their systems are down. They would prefer it that whatever we do in the authority file happens when they are ready to ingest it. And rather than having to ingest, whatever, 30, 60 million changed authority records when they come up and have to work that out. So at the moment we're on pause until we get an okay from the British Library and from the Library of Congress to just go ahead. We are just poised on that. Beyond that, of course, when we're not necessarily at OCLC, we're not necessarily the policy makers when it comes to cataloging, but when changes are made, certainly when changes are made to subject headings, we're try to be as quick as we can to flip those subject headings as changes are made, especially when they're one-to-one changes. They're very straightforward. There are a few initiatives involving discovery. I don't know if we might discuss them. One of them is, if you are using WMS, it can be possible to prefer certain subject headings appearing locally. So if there were terms that you would prefer do not appear, you could choose one, and that's being worked on as an enhancement to discovery based on your local preferences. Is there a follow-up or more discussion about that? All right, let's keep rolling.
All right. So there were several questions about field 758 in records of period at OCLC. So I think this is a perfect thing for Morris to
I thought you were going to
address
take
here.
the 758 questions, and I was going to take the 1160s.
Oh, no. Well, do you want to start with 758, or
No.
do we want to start with 1160?
No. Yes, there have been many comments, and we at OCLC appreciate the comments that are being made. We appreciate them more when they are put in a constructive way. Although we are taking note, because there have been a few people who have told me that they hate them. I said, well, what did they ever do to you? They're only just a few weeks old, for Pete's sake. I actually really appreciated Casey's sort of an analysis, 3-point analysis of them on the MOUG list, and I want to reemphasize the second point that he made, which is that for the work that you all are doing, it's probably best at this point to treat them as noise. If you are curious and you do click on them and you find that it is going to a, because, this is sort of the second rollout that's happened with the linked data at OCLC. The first rollout was for name identities. And for the most part, we did not get much comment. Most of the comments that we received were about, well, what if we changed the name? Or what if we thought the name was inappropriate and wanted to delete it? Are we allowed to delete the entity in the subfield 1? So those were the kind of questions. And the answer is, in case you're curious, is that if it no longer matches the name that is there, then no, you should not keep it, and it is appropriate simply to delete it. You don't have to look up a new one. For the 758s, if you were to click on the link and you saw that it is going someplace where it shouldn't, and by someplace that it shouldn't, just to be clear, not necessarily about the creation date. I know there are questions about the creation date and what that actually means, but as was pointed out about the duets title, that should be reported. That is what we would like. We don't want you to delete them. We would like you to report them to bibchange@oclc.org. We are taking those changes. We are trying to learn what worked and what didn't work as well. We did not apply this to every single record in WorldCat. So the technical folk thought that they were being careful. And again, it just so happens, as no surprise to anyone in this room, that what happens in music can multiply an issue several times over. So, what we work with is very special, and we get special errors. So please, if the best thing to do is, for better or worse, best thing to do is to leave them alone. But because that is not their purpose. Their purpose is not, as has been said before, the purpose of these, in particular the work entities, is not to do something interesting in a MARC record. The purpose of these is to prepare for the rollout of the linked data environment that we're planning to unveil this fall with a new product called Zenith. So, so for right now, again, if you want to check them, go ahead. If it looks very wrong, just report them to bibchange at oclc.org. But it's okay too if you don't do anything with them. It's okay if you choose not to bring them into your local catalog. They're not meant to do anything in your local catalog. So that would be okay if you decided that that would not be part of your process to bring them into your local system. Mark has a question about the H1160. No, I don't. Give him a mic. Give him a mic.
When you're done, just leave it on that table.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tired of running, huh? Okay. Whoa. So I just wanted to have Damian talk a little more about your about what you're doing with or not doing with conventional collective titles for incomplete compilations. I know that you've announced that the music division is kind of starting to follow the literature folks a little more and how that works. And so maybe could you talk a little more about that?
Sure, I can talk about that. I want to be clear that we are, how can I put this? We're dealing in a large volume of material that comes into the music division every year. We catalog between 5,000 to 6,000 items a year, and that fire hose of material never stops. And it is quite frankly, a cost savings to that if you have an aggregate to just accept the title on the aggregate as the title by which this aggregate is best known by, instead of continuing to create incomplete compilation headings, for lack of a better term. So, though it why is sonatas, piano selections more the composer and then sonatas, piano selections more informative than Beethoven's most loved piano sonatas? I think it seems that compilation is going to be known by that particular title, and the conventional collective titles for incomplete compilations, those were really filing devices back in the day where there's a need to organize the card catalog. Like, what do we do with all of these different compilations? Well, we can put them all together right here. And that made sense within the context of a linear file, but most people do not search a online library catalog anymore linearly. They're doing it via different entry points. So that's the reason why we've shaded more towards the literature policy of we just don't assign conventional collective titles except in these circumstances, which are complete works. And and this is a little bit of judgment, if the title itself is is super non-descriptive of what we're talking about, or it's something it's a non-collective title. That's another good example of that. So that's the reason why we've gone that way.
Okay, we're ready for that
we'll
explanation
do-
now.
All right, so we'll go. We can go on to H1160 if
Yeah.
we want to go ahead and do that. Okay. So, in case it was not clear from the messages, there is a section 6 in H1160 that talks about form genre headings in LCSH. And when I say form genre headings, in LCSH terms, a term like violin and piano music is considered a genre term. Okay, so I'm just using that to cover those sorts of things too. That in section 6, it talked about, well, what subdivisions can you use? And there's a whole list 1, of what subdivisions you can use. But then within section 6, there were all sorts of prohibitions. And one of the prohibitions was do not use the subdivisions in list 1 under, quote, headings for music of particular seasons, occasions, or styles, comma, etc., that neither state nor imply medium of performance, unquote. Well, that etc., like a lot of things in LCSH, is a slippery little bastard. Because what do you mean by etc.? And LCSH likes to work in the instruction sheets by examples. So then questions start coming up. Well, does this fit the prohibition? Does this fit the prohibition? Does this fit it? So, and if you went and you looked through library catalogs, you would see that the prohibition was just as often ignored as it was applied. So which means that people were just on autopilot and didn't read the instruction sheets, or they decided, well, that's dumb, I'm going to do this anyways. And part of the impetus for the change is that this particular prohibition was impacting on cataloging practice here in the music division. We have a lot of what we call unpublished copyright deposits, that they are simply lead sheets. It's a melody line with chord symbols above, and we have them in all sorts of popular music genres. Well, the prohibitions in section 6 would have said, well, you can't assign that to things like country music. And it's like, but I have a thing of country music here that's a lead sheet, So as long as we are in this dual environment, using LCSH and using GFT and everything, we decided, well, we need this to work. So let's see what ways we can do it. And the solution that we came up with was the nuclear option. Well, we'll just blow it up and say there are no prohibitions in section 6. You can use everything on list 1. And we dutifully ran this by the Cataloging and Metadata Committee of MLA, and they were in enthusiastic agreement about blowing up section 6. So that's where we are with that. And I'll just add on as a little bit of a caveat. I sort of got this feeling looking at list of, what are we going to do now and stuff like this. If we, as a community, we do truly believe that LCSH is on its way out as a way of doing form genre, then maybe we don't get too exorcised about this particular change to H1160. And in fact, in case anyone missed it, we are in discussions at the Library of Congress about how do we best go about moving away from LCSH. Now, that question is actually a little more complicated than we think, and I'm more than happy to talk about it here. But there's a lot of moving parts to it, and it's not as simple as just saying, "Well, don't use it." There are a lot of things to consider. So that's my H1160 spiel, but I'm more than willing to take other questions about it.
I'm just gonna sit.
Well, Damian, since there seems to be kind of a silence in the room, would you feel comfortable with talking about some of those moving parts? I think it would be instructive for the rest of us to hear what kinds of things, because it's easy to think, yes, you can just flip a switch, but I would be interested in hearing what some of the considerations are, and not just for the cataloging end of it, for the discovery end of it too. What implications will it have for the ILS, and maybe some of those things too.
Okay, so I think the biggest issue that exists at LCSH is that, excuse me, the way the topical headings work for music is exactly backwards from how most other things happen in LCSH. And that's because LCSH has a very long tail. There were solutions that were developed over years to deal with particular solutions that were being encountered. Essentially, LCSH was and is still being developed on the fly in certain respects. So right now in LCSH, if you want, we'll use waltzes. Waltzes is a good example. If I have a book about waltzes, the subject heading that I assign to that is waltzes, subfield X, and now you can tell I haven't cataloged in a long time because I'm forgetting the subdivision, history and criticism. There we go. So subfield X, history and criticism. Well, so basically what you've done is that you always establish the form first in LCSH, and then to topicalize it, you add on that $X, history and criticism. Well, that's how it is for almost every single subject heading that deals with music in LCSH. But not all of them, of course. There are the weird outliers of opera versus operas, sonata versus sonatas, etc. So what do we do about that? Well, because we just can't go through and cancel the subject heading waltzes, because history and criticism is being used with waltzes. Well, if we were to cancel that, then we'd have to reestablish waltzes with every single topical subdivision that could be established with it. And that's a lot of work. So that's one of the things we're having to consider, is that I think the thought was, well, we could just cancel these. Well, no, you can't just cancel them, because that wreaks havoc with how subject headings are built in LCSH for things about music. So I've asked some people in the division here to think about, is there a way to, in the instruction sheets, that basically say that you could still do this in LCSH, but basically LC and PCC are no longer doing this. They're using LC GFT and LC MPT. And that way, that maybe we can have a way to, that this is still how you establish subject headings. In this, you establish the form, and then you topicalize it using a subdivision. And that's how we go forward for the books on music. But then for things that are this form or are this medium, we use GFT and MPT. This is all in the embryonic discussion stage here. And like everyone else, time is a finite resource. And so if we are super serious about getting away from LCSH for formal headings, what's the quickest way of getting that done? And maybe the quickest way is just saying, by putting in the instruction sheet that LC and PCC no longer use these instruction sheets, or they only use this portion of the instruction sheet. So, there's a lot to consider. And in running in parallel with that, as far as a policy change, we'd also need to undertake a huge retrospective conversion project here at the library, using the parameters that Casey, among others, have set up for conversions that could happen. So that's where we're sort of at with that.
I was wondering, Damian, I remember back when Jerry Ostrov was coming to MLA MOUG and talking about perhaps, now this would really be more of a coding issue than a usage issue, but using the 655 indicator 0 for things that were the item. So instead of using, let's say, piano with orchestra shouldn't be in a 650. The piano with orchestra should be in a 655. And now that we're using the form genre thesaurus, we could actually combine them, at least in the same bib record, to have one that says piano with orchestra and one that says scores, for example. Has the ball moved so far now that no one's really thinking about that anymore?
I honestly, I hadn't thought about that. I don't think it's being thought of anymore, even though it's certainly possible within the standard, because there is an indicator value to use 0, second indicator value 0, if you're going to use form genre terms from Library of Congress,
Right.
subject headings. But I don't think there's been any thought to actually doing that. And I think there's been very few libraries that have actually done that.
Okay, I have an online question from Thomas Peace. He said, will there ever be an effort to create more performing arts genre form terms that were deferred during the music project?
Well, I'm not necessarily the most qualified person in the room, whether in person or virtually, to answer that. I think that's maybe a better question for the SACO music coordinator, Leo. And I'm sorry, Leo, I'm forgetting your last name. Simply know him as Leo, but that might be a better question, better answered by him.
Thank you. I am a fan of mononyms. So myself and Ann Adams are on the LCGFT advisory group, and so we're currently, hey there. And so we're currently talking about introducing dance terms to the vocabulary. There's also been conversations about the combined terms due to the task force report, combined task force report, because it was multiple groups. So it's in the works, but you have to remember when the vocabulary was created, a lot of the terms were pulled out of LCSH, whether people want to admit that or not. And as a result, there's a certain logic to it that's starting to fray. I'm sure you all have started to see. And so the other performing arts terms are trickling in, but we have to establish dance as a top-level term first. And that's also the case with experimental music, which is a very recent introduction to the vocabulary, which I'll talk about more on Friday. So I hope I answered your question, Tom, but we'll get a little bit more about that on Friday, so I don't want to spoil that quite yet.
Hi, this is Hermina, and I'm going to open the 758 thing again, Morris. Understanding that we are a very special, unique flower, and that we can ignore mostly the data in the 758s for now, what opportunities are there for the music community to get involved with OCLC to help them understand how special and wonderful we are, and so that they can tweak their model in a way that might work for us?
Thank you
If
for
it doesn't
that
assert that
question.
Rameau wrote an opera in 2002 or whatever.
Well, let me say that I'm going to be participating in discussions next month, which is in 2 days. But in March, I will be meeting with the product team that rolled out who are working with WorldCat entities. I'm going to be meeting with them mid-month to talk about the rollout with music. So again, if you can word your concerns in a constructive manner, I'd be happy to receive your emails. And if you wish to be less constructive, I will still accept them and edit as accordingly. No, again, I'm not sure, with the nature of some of the issues that we saw, that there aren't other constituencies that have similar problems. So it is definitely clearly important to me that if there are things, that are going on beyond some of the, and Keith was correct insofar there are connections between the way that the WorldCat entities were formulated and then applied to issues of Ferberization. So again, if you're using Discovery and you look up duets and the duets that are combined aren't necessarily the duets you were looking for, you're used to doing that and you're like, okay, I'm just going to pull out the ones that I need. When a similar algorithm is then applied and you see that Elton John's duets are now being tied to Bartok, it's not just that that's wrong, it's also going to cause us difficulties when we actually come up with a linked data interface because it's going to be making the wrong connection. So we need to let the developers know. And so, as I said, I'm going to be meeting with them to specifically talk about scores and sound recordings. So, again, if you're finding more examples, either share them with me or send them to me and copy BibChange, since they're the ones who are really supposed to be collecting them. So if you wanted to send them to me and copy BibChange, that would be terrific. But I think, again, they want to see specific examples rather than just sort of vague, what are you guys doing? You should have talked to us kind of thing. They really can use specific examples.
So I'd like to follow that, Casey Mullen, Western Washington. I'd like to follow up that question and answer with kind of the inverse problem. So I think what was, Morris, what you just mentioned was kind of this faulty conflation of two work entities. But I'm also thinking about, again, getting back to the whole aggregates thing, is that it seems to be what this 758 project is doing so far is essentially creating or deriving bib framework descriptions from bibliographic records, and I'm sure there are lots of other things going on under the hood there too. But I wonder how that is going to play out in the future with, say, works that are represented by a Mark 700 second indicator 2. And if there is someday a URI added to those fields that points to a work description, let's say it's an individual Beethoven sonata, is there going to be an attempt to reconcile that kind of URI with, let's say, a bib record that is only that Beethoven sonata? So is there, what kinds of actual linked data of linking together and reconciling things that are the same? So the analogous thing I can think of is what Library of Congress has been doing with their hubs. They call them bibframe hubs, as essentially a way to recreate the idea of a Ferber work in a bibframe environment. And I'm wondering if that sort of use case has been discussed yet at OCLC?
I don't know what's been discussed. That I can't tell you. But what I can tell you is that the way that the work entities are rolling out is that they are thinking about them as bibframe works. And that, so the reason that so many things appeared as duets was not because they were looking at the 700 fields that made them up. Those work entities were for the aggregate. Right. So, so in a ideal, if it worked as it should, and again, what we're seeing is a subset of a lot of things that did work because they weren't as complicated, right? So, so if you have an ebook, if you have a map, and it is of what it is, then great. Then it's going to have that work entity, and it's going to match perfectly. There should have been a work entity for that particular Bartok album, because I think they were all sound recordings. That particular Bartok duets, as well as the particular Elton John duets, as well as the Pavarotti duets and the Sinatra duets and all those other duets. They should all have their own work entities. And in fact, they might. They might actually have work entities that came from another bibliographic record. And it's just that the what actually appeared on said bibliographic record was not the one that it should be, but there is one in existence. So, but once you get past whatever that is, and then move to a place where that identifier can then be broken down into its component parts with their own identifiers. And those identifiers might already exist, as you said. You might have, a recording of the Moonlight Sonata, as well as a CD compilation of all of Beethoven's sonatas. There are going to be work entities that exist, and exist right now, for the compilation, as well as for the individual. What can be done in with an algorithm quickly, and what can be done through careful cultivation. That careful cultivation is going to take some time, and it's definitely not something we want to ask OCLC to have right by the fall. So, we're working our way forward, but I don't know if we're ready to. I'm not sure you're asking that this should be happening, but we should certainly be happening now, but we certainly should be talking about it.
Right. Yeah. Because again, it's just that it's this conflicting definitions of what a work is. There's the bibframe definition. There's the LRM definition. And in the music cataloging community, I just feel like we're so much more inculcated with the Ferber definition, even if we're not thinking of it as exactly the Ferber definition. Like we think of musical works as the Platonic work entity, and not so much as this particular aggregate and this particular aggregate and this particular aggregate. But the rest of the cataloging world is so focused on that as being what the work is, because of the influence that bibframe is starting to have on sort of our collective mind about it. That my takeaway is I just want to make sure it's part of the roadmap, that we're not going to lose sort of the intellectual value of all of these 700 fields we've been putting into our records for so long, that we're going to utilize them for linked data purposes and not just have them be sort of ignored by these sort of processes that add URIs to records. So thank you.
Yeah. And also just want to say that, again, in terms of what the WorldCat work entities are, there's also an element of the format built into them, so that the score of the Moonlight Sonata is a different work entity than the sound recording of the Moonlight Sonata, which again, in terms of both the official RDA and bibframe, that is a level of work that we're not used to when we all tried to learn what work is with what's now the original RDA, the WEMI model. You know, this is not the WEMI model.
Okay, this is Margaret, and I have an anonymous question on CVent. It said, can you explain, like IM5, the best way to come up with an inferred publication date for scores when there is only a copyright date to go on, and that date is clearly not when the item in hand was published, since it's just using an old plate?
Are you feeling this one?
Well, I can provide some ways we've gone about this in the past. We'll use the list piano music published in the 19th century is a pretty good example of this. Lots of plates reused at different times, and so a lot of times we're going on contextual clues. On the cover or the wrapper. Well, what works are being offered for sale? If it's something that comes after when we know this was written, that might help you infer a publication date. Sometimes we look at the prices on things. If we it used to be different before when there were so many more currencies in Europe. It's like, oh, these currencies are being listed at this price, and so if they're higher than what something else was offered before, you could say, well, this is probably a later publication. A lot of it is just what do you feel and how specific do you want to be? So we'll just take an extreme example. We'll say it has a copyright date of 1942, but it seems like, well, no, this seems like it was published within, today, but you don't want to commit to that. Well, there is ability to say, well, it was published in RDA, at least you can say, well, it was published between 1942 and now. Well, whatever now is. So, it's pretty much whatever you're comfortable with. Those are just some strategies you might want to think about using.
Yeah. And you, what did you say about line 5? What was that you?
The question said, can you explain like
IM5? Like IM5. So there's, there are also some guidelines on the BFAS page for when to input a new record. And there are times when you might be looking at something that, a Eulenberg reprint, and, it clearly was printed in the last 10 years. It was not printed in 1942, even if that's the copyright date. You might also check those guidelines to say, okay, so this one has a music number. Is that reason enough to say, well, it clearly wasn't published in 1942? And if you were to follow the rules that we've been working with, not necessarily. It's not necessarily true that if you have an ISBN, which you wouldn't have had ISBNs in 1942, it's not necessary for you to create a new record just because your copy has an ISBN. So if that helps or complicates, I don't know, but at least there are other things to consider if you're looking at it just for the sake of adding that record to WorldCat. Now again, if we're not talking about copyrights, if we're talking about something that's much older, you could also consider, depending on your skill set, cataloging it using Rare Books standard and coding it as such in the 040.
And we also have, this works more with older resources like from the 18th century and the 19th century. We do have books of catalogs of publishers. We have people who have done a whole lot of work tracing the various addresses of various publishing houses. So oftentimes an address will come in and save the day because you can see, oh, this address comes from so and so. And the internet can be a wonderful thing too. IMSLP has very exhaustive listings for very many different publishers about when certain plates were used or when certain music numbers were used, and the addresses for certain time periods. So that's also an extremely helpful resource.
This is Hermina. I have a follow-up question about reprints in the OCLC database. So this is something that I feel like comes up a whole lot when you have something in hand. It says that it's the 15th printing, and it has a date for that printing. And you look in OCLC, and there are 12 records in OCLC. Some of them say that they're for the 9th printing, and some of them say that they're for the 2nd printing, and some of them. How do you, OCLC, want us to deal with these? Because what I want to do is just take out the printing note and say that this record is for all of the printings, but that doesn't seem legit. So how are we to deal with these situations? Are we going to make another new record that is going to add to the clutter in WorldCat, or are we going to use one of these other ones? And we can't just delete the printing information because we use WorldCat for all of our records.
So again, we go back to plugging the duplicate record reporting. If you feel that these are duplicates, please report them to us. Again, bibchange@oclc.org, and we can review them. Part of that, of course, is this goes back to AACR 2 and the policies regarding printings as opposed to editions. And especially if you're looking at books published in foreign languages, not everyone knows, and sometimes they're using the same word for printing as for edition. So, our policy is that in terms of merging, that if that printing date justifies a new publication date, we would not merge them. So if you said, well, I have a 3rd printing, I have a 6th printing, I have a 7th printing, I have a 12th printing, but if they all had different publication dates, our policy would not be to merge it, because whoever created those bib records we're just going to have an understanding that they did that intentionally. So if you see something that says 3rd printing, 7th printing, 12th printing, but they were all printed in 1913, that might be something that we would then consider merging. But if they have different publication dates, then our policy is to leave those alone. And of course, and that is something that happens, not often, but often enough to mention, that we only merge records of the same language, cataloging language. So we occasionally get requests and say, well, there's this German cataloging record and an English cataloging record and a French cataloging record. Could you please merge them? We would not merge those.
This is just a quick follow-up to what Hermina asked, mainly as a commiseration. When you were describing that, Hermina, in my head, I'm like, Baron Writer! And yeah, those printing dates, and there's a proliferation of records, but then also sometimes there are other changes. There's a new preface, there's a redesign of the title page. And so, yeah, it's a headache, because then it's like, okay, well, I don't have cause to request that, or I guess merge all of these, but I also don't want to put in a new record, so I kind of have to pick the one that otherwise matches, even if it has a different printing indicated in the description, and then I just kind of hold my nose and do it and move on with my life. But yeah, it's one of those things where when you're caught in between, I don't want to put in a new record, but I don't have cause to merge either, you just kind of have to do your best, I guess.
Yeah, it's really not us, it's the publishers. It's really not OCLC, it's the publishers. Okay, we got 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. Anyone for 1 minute? We got one question, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute. Sold American. I guess we're done. Oh, Rebecca, thank you. As long as it's for Damian.
Hi, this is a request for Morris at OCLC, but maybe since we're all here, we could do a straw poll to see if this comes from all of MOUG. With moving form of musical notation into 348 subfield C, can we add that to both the entity index and the keyword index in WorldCat?
I will send me an email and I will forward it along. Again, that is,
Do people like that idea?
I mean, again, you think about the numbers of records we're talking about and the number of the time that reindexing takes. It can scare off some people. So but please send it along, send me the message and I will forward it. Absolutely. Bye, Damian.
Bye bye. Thank you.